Welcome to B2B Commerce Uncut, a journey through change. On this podcast, we have honest, hard-hitting conversations with thought leaders, distributors, and innovators in digital commerce and transformation. We explore not only the success, but also the challenges that manufacturers, distributors, and wholesalers can face in achieving successful digital transformation for their companies. This episode is brought to you by Oro, a leading innovator and provider of customer-driven, powerful, and connected open-source software for B2B digital transformation. Oro seeks to build long-term, trustful relationships with its customers, integrators, developers, and technology partners by empowering people with the best tools to digitalize their business. Find out more at oroinc.com. That's OROINC.com. And here's your host, Daphna Andrews.
So welcome everybody to the B2B Commerce Uncut podcast. It's a journey through change. My name is Daphna Andrews. I am Vice President of Customer Experience at Oro, and I'm pleased to be hosting this podcast where we bring you honest conversations with thought leaders, disruptors, and innovators in digital commerce and transformation. Personally, for a second about me, I have over 20 years of B2B commerce and digital transformation experience as a practitioner, as a consultant, and as a leader. In each episode, we will be sharing our collective experience to empower B2B change agents in all industries with the tools they need for success in their companies and in their jobs. And really, the power of digital commerce extends beyond revenue growth. And it really goes towards channel penetration and changing the mindset of employees, becoming more digital all around, becoming more transformational, and the benefits are limitless. I'm very pleased today to have Jeff Jerge as our guest. He is the VP of Strategic Partnerships at PartsBase. And prior to PartsBase, Jeff served in the aviation industry as a management consultant for supply chain and digital platform enablement. Some of his clients included Oliver Wyman, Boston Consulting Group, and various other entities concerning go-to-market strategies, sales enablement, and top-line growth initiatives. So with that, I would like to welcome Jeff and have him tell him a little more about himself and how they've been working just briefly with Oro and any other information you'd like to provide.
Sure, Daphna. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast, and working with Oro, I'll say, has been wonderful. My career, I've been in the aviation industry for almost 25 years. I started flying planes and have kept with that a little bit on the side. So I built up, all my flight time and really have spent my entire career in the aviation aftermarket, working for OEMs, distributors, and then on the basically technology side and on the marketplace side. I've been at PartsBase now for about 7 months, and PartsBase has been known in the industry as leading in technology, bringing buyers and sellers together. It certainly is a number one platform in our space, and so I am pleased to be here and share our experiences with you.
Excellent. Thank you. So I'm very curious about your path and how you sort of pursued a journey into a digital transformation advocacy role. I know that's something you're very passionate about, and you're leading that at PartsBase, which I understand in the aviation industry, might be slower to adopt digital and transformation. So I'm curious about how you got to the place you are and how you are passionate about the transformational role.
Sure. No, absolutely. So I guess if I could point it to one area, I mentioned when I started kind of flying in the industry. And when you look at the flight operations side, technology of the last 20 years has just completely taken over. Airplanes are sending data like never before on, what kind of maintenance items need to come up, flight planning, crew planning, scheduling, fuel. There's so much cool tech going into the flight operations side. And then you go to the support side of it, and people are in emails and on the phone and sending paper back and forth, and even document transfer has been an issue. And so when you look at all these analog processes going on the $600 billion support side of the market, compared to what happens on the flight operation side, for me, it's just a passion to try to bring that technology into the supply chain.
So that's very interesting. You mentioned about all the digital aspects on board and with the actual machinery. So are you seeing a progression into, say, for example, a plane has something going on, I don't know, it needs a different part, something's maybe not critical, but that it transfers it to the crew, say, when they land, they already have the information to get that part ready and get that servicing going?
For the OEMs that are making airplanes today, I worked for Boeing for over 12 years, and they had a program called Airplane Health Management. And the whole idea is if the airplane is monitoring the equipment, and in this space, you have scheduled maintenance. Aviation is a very regulatory environment, so a certain number of hours can happen before a plane has to go through an A, B, C, or D check. A D check being a complete overhaul of the plane, everything's taken off and rebuilt or installed new and then put back on. But aviation business is a logistics business, and things happen. Lots of things happen. And so you have a lot of unscheduled things that are going on. So really the airplanes and the equipment are starting to tell the story as to, hey, this part isn't supposed to be replaced, but it looks like we're going to have a problem with it in another couple hours. And so the vision of the supply chain of the future is that an airplane flying from New York to Los Angeles, and something happens in the middle where the airplane says, hey, this part is going to need to be replaced. We need to get it in LA by the time we land. And then the supply chain sort of acts around that. So if you look at the technology, it's really cool, and bringing the supply chain into that workflow is where the future's headed.
That is absolute. That's the stuff I love to hear. Really, actually, I mean, it's just, I don't know, that just makes me so excited to hear that. So when you look at PartsBase and where they were at and where they're going as a company, or sort of how are they embracing digital commerce? How are you guys making that a key component of your sales strategy?
Sure. So PartsBase has been leading the way now for 26, 27 years. They were the first, I'll say, locator on the internet in, believe it or not, 1996, 1997 timeframe. Really, they've built a platform that has 7,400 companies, 25,000 users in over 130 countries. And it's really evolved over the years. So they've been bringing buyers and sellers together where things can be quoted, people are brought together, where parts and material and repairs and data and all these things come together in this community. The parts store is really an extension of that, and that is the first transactional marketplace in the aviation industry. Let me go back a little bit. Suppliers are starting to develop e-commerce websites, and really from a B2B world, if you're a buyer and you go to a supplier and start going to this e-commerce site, the next one, it's really inconvenient for the buyer. So the vision behind the parts store is, let's go ahead and create a transactional marketplace where a buyer can come, shop multiple sellers at the same time, add to their basket, and check out with a secure payment method and transaction right then and there. And so we launched this back, I guess, during PB Expo in early March, a couple weeks ago, and we've already have 10 participants on it, and we're forecasted to have over 100 participants by the end of the year.
Wow, that is excellent. And so these, as far as the benefits then also that you are seeing from maybe an internal operational perspective, or things that you've mentioned a couple of the benefits to your end users, but I'm curious if you see additional ones.
Sure. So any online transaction is going to provide several benefits. First off, we already know the demand signal coming out, meaning somebody already knows that there's a maintenance event and they don't have equipment in stock to solve the event. Today, they have to either go on a locator and wait for quotes or pick up the phone if they don't get those quotes back in time. So pretty much from a logistics standpoint, somebody can log in, have the transaction complete without talking to anybody. In our environment, in the B2B world, where you might have American Airlines in Dallas, but you have a plane in Singapore that needs this unscheduled maintenance. So the ability to be 24/7 online around the clock in a marketplace environment to be able to secure transactions is really important for sustainability to the industry. So I think the benefits really, if you look at our purpose and why, we support airplane flying for both commercial, defense, business aviation, general aviation, and so, when that plane takes off on time, PartsBase is one of the players that makes that happen out of all the logistical things that need to come together.
That is, it's amazing to hear that because from the perspective of, all the supply chain issues, it's become an everyday term to hear the word that there's supply chain issues, that there is delays in, manufacturing. People all knew that from COVID, right? And people, it's funny because you'll hear somebody say, like, I was at Target and somebody said something to the effect, overheard a conversation and someone said, wow, they never have this and this product in. And another person goes, must be supply chain issues. And to hear that from like just like an everyday person, could be they were in the industry, but who knows? But I think you guys are closing that gap, minimizing those risks, making sure that you can do everything possible to get the parts where they need to go as soon as possible, effectively and successfully. So that's amazing.
And also, if you think about aircraft parts, I mean, they range, a typical airplane can have as many as 10,000 parts on it, right? Or 10,000 OEMs on it, I should say, 10,000 manufacturers that make up the parts of an airplane. Because as a passenger, everything from a light bulb, a seatbelt, to landing gears, engines, I mean, all those components are made by different manufacturers. And the ability for the supply chain to come together and providing the visibility as to not only who has what, but where parts are. So on the parts store and the marketplace that we created, we allow people to list the location of their inventory. Future enhancements are going to be, you'll be able to get products from multiple locations, payment services, shipping options. A lot of aviation parts, believe it or not, are shipped overnight or at least same day, next day. Because of that unscheduled maintenance. It's really expensive to have an airplane sitting at the gate. There's some estimates upwards of $50,000 to $60,000 for an hour or two to have an airplane sitting at the gate because it's not drawing any revenue. So when something happens in the maintenance world, there's a lot of, I'll say, scrambling to be able to get an airplane back in the air.
Yes, especially since the aviation industry is under scrutiny, right, with their on time and delays and such like that. It just makes your business even more critical.
Correct.
Yeah. So how do you think that your digital commerce component has really facilitated your company's PartsBase, digital transformation overall? Is it something that has helped move the needle to make people understand the importance of transformation? Is that how you see it?
So I think COVID introduced people to transformation in every supply chain, but aviation is one of those industries where, because of the requirements and that you have to be able to rely on somebody, it can be really kind of scary to bring on a new vendor, right? If you're used to getting this part from this OEM, there might be alternatives to it, and the more expensive the parts, the more they get sort of contracted and shopped in an RFQ, RFI format. But that being said, once you have a vendor that can deliver to your standards, then not much disruption happens to that. Well, COVID kind of took a chance to go for the industry, the end users, to go, wait a minute, I need to have multiple sources that I can rely on in case something happens with one of my sources. So not only does the parts store help you transact with vendors that you know, it also gives both suppliers and buyers a chance to make a new connection. Just to be able to have these, approved suppliers in your system. And I will say that in this regulated environment, even getting approval to sell to an airline, it can take a while. And so being able to get introduced to those people and be able to have a transaction so that you can pretty much buy on the spot has been, I'll say, believe it or not, revolutionary on the support side on the aircraft.
Absolutely. And so do you have sort of some input here on why PartsBase chose Oro Commerce to be a trusted vendor in enabling this transformation for you?
Well, I mean, in all industries, really, marketplaces are the future. And in aviation, I'll say we're happy to lead the pack. And I think one of the reasons that we chose Oro is because you have that solid framework and solid marketplace experience. Quite frankly, we didn't want to, bet on anybody new that was sort of unproven. And I think Oro has the proven platform to be able to handle the scalability at which we expect this to take off. Unintended.
Excellent.
So
That was a good one.
yeah.
Okay. How do I feel that you have like many more puns in your back pocket that just are natural in your everyday speak? So you as an expert in, this kind of leading transformation, this area of where you're really understanding how, the aviation industry, you spoke about the back end, how analog and offline it is. Can you talk about like the general level of digital maturity of companies in the aviation industry? Not necessarily, obviously, the ones that are making sure the plane is running, because those are obviously transformed and very digitized. But my question really is about like for the people that are listening. I'm sure there are numerous people, hundreds, if not thousands, that are going to basically connect with you on the fact that it's hard to change the mindset. It's hard to change, and a company that's been offline for the most part, not digitized, not digitalized, and definitely not transformed. How can you speak a little bit to the challenges you've encountered in this space in aviation?
Sure. So, the space in general, and some of the resistance to the digital transformation has been through a couple of factors. First off, data sharing. A lot of sellers and suppliers were a little uncomfortable putting their pricing out and putting some of their data out because they feel like that it's a competitive in nature, that they'll just get shopped and somebody will move on to the next order. There's been resistance to that, and then also one of the biggest factors when you deal with a sales team at a seller is, I don't want anybody between me and my customer. The chance that I can quote them a 50-cent light bulb gives me a chance to talk to them and ask how their business is going. And you'd be surprised where somebody wants to have an engagement over a 50-cent light bulb. What we're really seeing is that you have a little bit of a generational shift also coming into the industry. We're all carrying these iPhones around and ordering on Amazon, and then you get to work and the experience is much more analog. And so what we're finding is that there is a shift in the industry right now where people are going, look, my own sales team needs to be redeployed to those relationships at a contractual level and things that are bigger and better than fulfilling a 50-cent order. So there's like in other industries, I mean, I can't buy a house online just yet because it's such a large purchase. So some of these bigger aircraft components, like a landing gear, can be $2 million, or an auxiliary power unit could be $700,000. Those probably aren't going to digitize out on Google just yet, but what I'm finding is that there's price points that are driving behavior, and that I can automate the transaction at a certain price point and focus on my customer and their real needs, not these light bulbs. And then also, I talked about the criticality of these parts. So by having a marketplace, you're on 24/7 worldwide. So that whole emergency maintenance logistics standpoint tends to come into play. And that's where a lot of people are starting to move online as well.
So that's interesting because it sounds like you're saying, as you're alleviating these rote tasks and these, kind of small little piddly sales. Your sales, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm seeming to understand that your sales reps are now empowered to be building more sort of consultative and trusting relationships where they're selling solutions, and they are selling that house versus, say, the door, right? And that house is where they're going to live, and that house means something to those people. And it sounds like that's sort of how your sales reps are really being able to transform into not just larger sales, but that trusted relationship.
Correct. And believe it or not, we see it on the buy side as well. I've had lots of conversations where, quite frankly, there's some job security from a buyer and saying, hey, I'm the only one that knows how to push these buttons. And if it's automated, maybe I'll lose some of that. And I just think everyone going through COVID and the drive toward digitization. I mean, you saw it in the news on a major airline in December had a very public meltdown because their systems weren't upgraded, right? And they are doing wonderful. They kind of took the heat and said, we understand the importance of digitizing and upgrading systems. And even that example that we all kind of see as consumers, that mindset of, look, we cannot run this on antiquated systems anymore. It's time to digitize. It's time to invest in technology across the industry. And so you're really seeing a push towards that.
Yeah, that is actually interesting. And you are right. They did have a very eloquent way of handling that situation. So,
Good job.
so as far as, let's pivot a little bit more into talking about sort of the innovational perspective of digital transformation especially in your space. So speaking just to kind of level set on digital transformation, everybody knows it's a buzzword, but the true sense of the word, and you and I have had conversations definitely before this podcast where you really do embody and you understand what transformation really is. And, in the true sense of the word or the term, it's really about people and processes foremost. Kind of an internal perspective, it's challenging your existing processes, structures, capabilities in the organization, and really requiring people to find new ways of working. And then externally, really, how does that sort of parlay into revenue, growth, and innovation? You're monetizing the technology, and really that's requiring, the business to create new business models, looking at ways to penetrate new markets or gain existing market share in the markets they're in. And one of the things I love to use as an example is you see a lot of times in vehicles where heated seats was just something you would purchase as part of a tier, whatever the level of vehicle you're buying. Then they decided, some of the companies decided to monetize that feature where it became a subscription. So you can see there that they're using technology, that they have this ability to turn on and off the heated seats through this technology. They're monetizing it by now saying, okay, you may not have to buy this tier of car, but you know what? If you want heated seats in the winter, it'll be a little more expensive if you want it than if you want it in the summertime. So I'm just curious, how do you see really the some of these innovations that have modernized procurement in your space? Like, how are you seeing? I know you've spoken to that a bit here, but as far as innovation, how are you seeing that really kind of innovate for other companies and the way they're doing their business?
Yeah, I mean, I probably don't have an example close to that heated seat, but yeah, I will say the airline industry or the parts industry has gotten very creative over the years in the sense of parts leasing, as opposed to acquisition, things like that. But the hard part in this industry is really, there's a saying that you're not buying the part, you're buying the paperwork. And the reason is, in that regulatory environment, parts change hands, aircraft get torn down, and then there's also alternatives to the OEM. And really, a lot of the technology that PartsBase has invested in over the years has been pulling in as much data around these transactions as possible. So PartsBase will tell you when you put in a part number in their main locator product, we can tell you anything that's alternate that the FAA has deemed. We can tell you anything that the government might be buying under some sort of alternate part number. So really data is where I see the future of being able to pull together, but also what you're finding is people are monetizing the data stream a little bit. So when you see a logistical problem, the first thing that comes up is, all right, how do I make sure that this doesn't happen again? So you start to get a lot of failure rates from an operation standpoint, but then also, how many sources of supply, how much competition is out there? What is the average pricing going? PartsBase sells market data basically to help assist anything with the transaction. On the supplier side, outside of leasing or anything on recurring revenue streams, it's still a very transactional oriented business. I think probably because the complex nature and quite frankly, the cost involved in those components. But as far as incremental monetization, I think data is probably the next wave in the equation as to, where the industry is looking and hungry to obtain information. So data would certainly be it.
That is fascinating because it sounds like it's almost like where you have like the Carfax or something where you can learn about your car and you have all the data that, is in there. But is there a way that you can almost monetize sort of the certification that PartsBase does that, okay, we know that this is possible, or is that not because you can't control necessarily the past information of the product?
We're a marketplace facilitator, so we don't own the parts, we don't own the data trace, but I'll give you an example. Several years ago, we expanded our data fields. So where a typical marketplace might have 4 or 5 or 6 fields that are mandatory to be able to transact, we opened that up and created many more fields to be able to help capture data elements along with the ultimately leading to the transaction. So we can take an image of a certificate, which is required for every part. We can capture the serialization of it. A part has to be serialized. Some parts have to be serialized. We can capture the traceability. In our industry, that's really big, where a part can be traced back to the last certifying event. In the future, I think blockchain will start to take off in the industry a little bit. I know that's been a marketing buzzword, and I would say that in the next couple of years, PartsBase will more than likely be partaking in the blockchain side. But then even just secure transactions, and that's another reason that we chose Oro, is your integrations with so many different transactional parties. I mean, we started with a credit card. We're working with an alternative credit line company, but just being able to access secure payment methods, you have some traceability to the transaction that's been captured at that point. And so ultimately that'll lead into the blockchain, we think, and be a stamp in that ledger that the transaction happened. So as you start to think about data and you start to think about visibility and transparency of a supply chain, we already have plans and have built out some of the necessary fields to be able to support where the industry is heading, which is going to be full transparency from the birth of an airplane to the teardown to the redeployment of those assets.
So that is, I mean, to me, that's so fascinating how you're parlaying like that new technology, that innovation. But, there's always going to be people who are maybe digital. I shouldn't, some people say the word laggers, late adopters, whatever you want to call them. As a leader in your space, how do you approach people? And that could be anyone from your peers to somebody who's, say, managing, I don't know, finance or whatever the case may be. How do you approach people and try to make them change agents, bring them on board, sort of drink the Kool-Aid, if you will?
For sure. I mean, and I've had the pleasure of the last, 25 years or so in the industry, and you'll meet very common to have this resistance, I'll say, in our industry. And it's amazing because if you think about all the technological advances that have happened, that you find that resistance. But one, I think everybody's starting to get it. And because when you look at the use on our phones and all the apps and everything, I think our daily lives, technology is becoming more and more. I mean, I'm sure, I was in the grocery store line and somebody wrote a check the other day and I just couldn't believe it. I was just really, you're still writing checks. So you are going to
What are those?
I know, right? You're still going to have those folks in any industry or anywhere. But I think the thing that is starting to resonate is, one, the conversation is it's coming anyway. So you can either be ahead of it or resistant to it, but it's coming. And then secondly, I think when you try to really uncover the true resistance, it's generally either I'm set in my ways or I will need to protect myself in some way where if I keep it analog, I can protect myself. And honestly, there's a lot of people in the aviation industry that make money off of inefficiencies in the supply chain because, I'll have stock, I'll have a relationship with you. And because you can't see who else has that stock, we work together. So that's how I get the sale. And I think the tolerance for that, when you look at the working capital tied up in inventory for an airline, maintenance is the third largest expense in an airline. And so, and a lot of that's tied up in working capital and inventory. And so what happens is you'll get somebody saying, or you'll get an airline environment where they're like, okay, we're going to do just in time. We can't stock up on extra inventory. And then something happens and then the whole supply chain breaks. So I think when you start to look at the cost of not adopting, even, my own self and my own company, but the cost to the industry and the inefficiency and the cost to the passengers, you always try to bring it back to the why. Or a defense program that is at risk because there's a supply chain shortage. I mean, it really are impacting so much beyond ourselves when you put it in that perspective. And so I always try to uncover what the resistance really is for, and then just try to bring them along on the benefits. And it's been a challenge. It is in every industry. we have those people that still like to write checks, but I think more and more we're finding comfort level amongst suppliers and buyers with going, you know what, I just want to hop online and buy this. I don't want to, I don't need to talk to you about this particular transaction because we already know each other. I tend to look at it honestly like when you have a close relationship, it could be a spouse or a good friend or whatever, you already know each other. So just send a quick text and then it's done. You don't have to talk and make it complicated. You're already past that phase. And so I kind of liken the digital phase in the B2B world is, look, once one, it gives me a chance to meet somebody new, but two, once we know each other, why do we want to be dealing with paperwork? Like, let's just send a text and be done with it, and we know that the transaction happened. So I think it's pretty exciting to see that kind of unfold live. And we had at our PB Expo, we had Michael Collette with Air Canada, who's the managing director there, and we had Freddie Rubena with United, and both of them were very on my panel with Yoav and team, but both of them were very, quite frankly, I had asked a question. I said, how does digital enablement affect your relationships with suppliers? And really the answer was the relationships are getting better because one, we're focused more on the strategic initiatives, like you mentioned, and two, it's much more clear that the supplier understands the expectations of the performance to report, to perform to, and we can have visibility into that. So I find that digital enablement actually is improving relationships rather than threatening them, which is sort of an initial reaction.
That's a very good point, because especially when the fact that, this digital enablement provides so much more data that helps you make these data-driven decisions, people are seeing, the benefits of that versus having to make a gut instinct decision, which, can go either way, right? But as far as providing anyone out there that's listening that might be in your shoes, that might be getting pushback internally, and, there's challenges getting people on board and support for their initiatives transformationally, what would be a couple things that you would advise them to sort of start with to try to get their teams or their CEO or whomever on board?
So I think, one of my questions that I asked at our expo was, what's your advice to these companies that haven't taken the digital shift yet and bought into the digital strategy? And everybody said, just start. It's like any kind of habit, just start somewhere. So pick an area where you're comfortable with. Maybe if you're a seller and you don't want to, you're wondering what to put out there, I always say put 2 or 3 things out there. One, you could put your slow moving things that you're comfortable sharing your pricing with, right? 2, you could put a dollar threshold. Say, okay, right now I'm only comfortable with anything under $5,000 or $10,000. Back to that house buy. Set a dollar threshold. And next, you really need to look at the benefits of moving online and into that environment. One, you're going to get a cost of sale that decreases. Because you're not having someone quote and follow up and email. You're doing all of that. Next, by taking a payment right away in the transaction, you don't have accounts AR to go chase. You don't have accounts receivable to go chase. You don't have bad debt. Because you get paid right away. And so I think one of the, where I talk to sellers that are maybe a little bit on the fence, I say, let's start with something that's comfortable for you. Maybe it's a dollar threshold or a type of inventory. And then by pointing out these benefits where you really see that cost of sale decline and your accounting costs and your bad debt, your balance sheet, all that stuff that gets impacted by transactions that go poorly, you'll see improvements on right away. It's like your ROI is immediately captured.
It's amazing. It's these aha moments, that it brings.
It is.
So just kind of rounding us out, you spoke a little bit about the future of PartsBase, where you're going with your marketplace. Are there any other things you'd like to just mention as little teasers for the audience?
Yeah, we're very excited about the parts store. It is the future of the industry. It's one of the future initiatives of PartsBase. And I think the teaser is there's going to be much more, there'll be many more versions that come out with, I wouldn't say improvements, but enhancements in what services are offered to clients. So when you think about a transaction, much like an airplane taking off, you have all these moving pieces. Not only it's a part for sale and somebody bought it, you have a payment service there, you have shipping and logistics, you have insurance, you have, different shipping options that you can choose. You can have different locations that things move from. So I would say enhancements in all those areas. I talked a little bit about blockchain. PartsBase is ready for blockchain. It's just the industry hasn't quite come up with a standard yet. And so that'll be in future work when we feel like the industry is there and ready in the supply chain. And then, of course, our other parts-based initiatives. I mean, what we try to tell people, it's really, the company is founded on building a community. And so we have these 25,000 users that we connect every day for the last, 26 years. And so for us, the parts store and the expo, they're just really enhancements to our community. And once you're in one of those sections, it's really easy to expand and move into other parts of that aviation community.
Got it. Well, awesome, Jeff. I want to thank you so much and for your continued success at PartsBase. And in the future, definitely I'd love to continue the conversation, see how things are growing and innovating there. And you definitely fight the good fight and make sure that everything is tip-top shape. I don't know, I guess that's not really an aviation pun, but that's more of a, I don't know, but thank you again. And I look forward to chatting with you in the future.
Thank you so much. And I will say that our experience with Oro has been wonderful. The expertise there, the platform has been wonderful. You all are really thought leaders. And I've relied on you all to tell us, some other industry initiatives that you've seen succeed versus fail. So we're definitely a partnership, and we're happy to be working with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon.
This episode is brought to you by Oro, a leading innovator and provider of customer-driven, powerful, and connected open-source software for B2B digital transformation. Oro seeks to build long-term, trustful relationships with its customers, integrators, developers, and technology partners by empowering people with the best tools to digitalize their business. Find out more at oroinc.com. That's OROINC.com. Thank you for listening to B2B Commerce Uncut, a journey through change, powered by Oro. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode.